Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and Don Muchow, and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. The Traveling Salesman, Part 8. I suppose it would be inaccurate to say that the universe folded around Glactyl and me like an origami box. First of all, I've never seen origami boxes, only origami cranes and Chinese takeout boxes. But it was something like that. One moment we were on our spaceship, and the next, the two of us appeared elsewhere. And to be honest, I don't know where elsewhere was. Glactyl, my interstellar trading partner, didn't waste any time popping his first question. "Bob, what the hell have you done?" Okay, first of all, that was a low blow. We had both pulled simultaneously on either end of the ancient Zil artifacts I had found on Algar. So technically, it should have been, what have we done? But Glactyl never liked the fact that I blamed him for Jeremy stealing the life force ampules from the slaughterhouse back on Earth. That's another story, which released a prion plague that was all but indistinguishable from the zombie apocalypse. So he was getting back at me for that. Right now, Glactyl and I were standing in a semi-transparent hallway, watching stars, galaxies, nebulae, and the occasional cosmic string blink in and out of view as they rushed by below. "I didn't do anything you didn't do," I said. "And at least we figured out what the device does." "Which is?" said Glactyl. "I don't know. This." I gestured around us, as if a semi-transparent hallway with thousands of doors leading off in all directions was self-explanatory. Glactyl seemed strangely unflustered. "This must be where the Zil went," he said. "It makes perfect sense. It's some sort of trans-dimensional nexus that connects too many different places." I looked around the strange hallway, and despite what Glactyl called it, I immediately renamed it the Hall of 1,000 Doors. Studying the surreal surroundings, the semi-transparent walls, the stars that seemed to stream past, and the countless apertures along its length, I grew even more confused. None of this made sense. Not one bit. "The artifact," Glactyl announced with some formality, "is what your theoretical physicists would call a Calibi-Yau manifold expansion device. My conjecture is that by using the device, the Zil were able to bend space and time, such that they were transported to this place, from which they could reach any other place they pleased." I looked down the hallway. Then I looked back in the other direction at what, for all intents and purposes, was a giant transparent purple cube with glowing lights inside. Off to both sides were more hallways and staircases that seemed to lead off into infinity. It reminded me of an M.C. Escher engraving. "This is a dimensional gateway of sorts," said Glactyl. "They didn't arrive here to settle. For them, this was just a waypoint to somewhere else." "But where?" "You like to explore," said Glactyl. "I suggest we start looking and see if we can find out." After about an hour of walking down the Hall of 1,000 Doors, I regretted ever telling Glactyl about the people of Earth's desire to explore. In fact, I tired of it pretty quickly. Behind each door, and that would be an inappropriate term since many were open archways, lay the landscape of some presumably far-flung world, complete with sounds and smells. One was an icy, ammonia-drenched moon. Another displayed noxious cloudscapes reeking of sulfur and acids. There were worlds of violently heaving oceans and vast as well as vistas of endless deserts with not a soul in sight. In some places, it was daytime, and on others, night. Sometimes I could hear the loud chirping of distant insects, and it made me homesick for Earth. Each of the doorways was sealed by an invisible force field. However, whenever Glactyl approached a doorway with the Zil artifact, the edges of the doorway glowed. "Do you suppose these are all actual planets out there somewhere?" I asked Glactyl. "Perhaps," said Glactyl. But on none of them do I see signs of civilization. If there is such, it's hidden or long buried. I thought about the worlds on the other side of the doorways for a while, then realized I had slowed to a shuffle, drawn briefly to stare at each one. I hurried to catch up with Glactyl. 10 hours later, we had not seen even one sign of a populated world. I began to wonder if the doorways opened up not just to other planets, but to other times as well. Times where civilization had long died, or had not yet been born. I mentioned the possibility to Glactyl, largely because I was beginning to feel like we'd never get out of this place. "You have a point, it seems," Glactyl said, distantly, as if stating the observation to the room and not to me. "That we would have to consider the possibility that this hallway leads not just to other places, but to other times. Perhaps the Zil were able to achieve something other civilizations had not." "Then that means that the Zil could be not just anywhere, but anywhen," I replied. "Precisely. We'll need some other source of information to narrow down our search. I suggest..." Glactyl looked at me funny. "What?" I asked. "It's just that you have this peculiar look on your face, and for the last half hour you have been walking like you have a clawfish up your hindquarters." "Oh, that," I said. "I have to go to the bathroom." I have to give Glactyl credit for immediately altering his mission from looking for the Zil to searching for the bathroom. This is not to mention the fact that presumably our biologies and probably even external anatomy were completely different. I suspected he had been holding it as well, and I was just as glad to make that the focus of our current endeavor. Our search for the restroom facilities took us down one of the several identical side hallways. On Earth, restrooms are always located in side hallways, even often in the innermost part of the building. And they're never clean, even at 5 a.m. How can that be? Is somebody actually paid to enter the building at 5 a.m. and dirty up the restroom? It makes me wonder what the architects must have been thinking. Let's put this here, right next to the elevator shaft, so visitors can hear patrons screaming when they realize that nobody has changed the toilet paper. Heading down one side of the hallway, in particular, we encountered what I shall call the presence. Glactyl didn't feel it at first, but since, as I have been told, my race is one given to ignorance, superstition, and a tendency to imbue the unknown with imagined godly powers, I naturally became curious to know who the fuck was listening in on us. "Show yourself!" I shouted. "I'm right here, Bob." "Wow, mysterious presence. You sound exactly like Glactyl." Glactyl struck me lightly on the shoulder. "You doofus. I am Glactyl." "Then how can you be I turned to see Glactyl standing at my side. He looked a little hyperdimensional, if that is a thing, you know, double outlines of him in several nearly but not completely identical locations, that kind of thing. But it was, for sure, him. "Didn't mean to scare you, my friend," Glactyl said. "Are you all right?" I think so," I said. I just felt a presence nearby, something intelligent and malevolent. It was very close." "I felt it too, and without venturing too far into conjecture, I'd say it knows we're here, while we do not know where it is." I wiped sweat off my brow. I might have peed myself. After all, I still had to go to the bathroom. "That's just grand," I said. "No, it isn't," said Glactyl. "Oh, wait, that's sarcasm, am I right? Another of your idiomatic Earth communication styles. No wonder you are such skilled communicators and negotiators." I was kind of lost, being scared for a moment. "You really think so?" "I have come to admire it," said Glactyl, "though I am not sure I'll ever master it. You insult people to form a close bond. You lie to people when you care too much about them to expose them to the truth. Your race is a hodgepodge of mutually conflicting extremes. You're obsessed with games and movies about things that are not true and seem to eschew reality at the most inconvenient times." "Ah, shucks, Glactyl," I replied. "That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. Do you really mean it?" "Hell no," he said as he patted me on the shoulder and smiled. "What I meant to say was, you're a dumbass." A few minutes later, I no longer sensed the presence and felt it was safe to return to the main hallway. Whatever I'd felt had come and gone. When we returned to the hall, both Glactyl and I had lost any sense of how far we had gone or where we were. Glactyl was getting hungry, and I felt like I could use a bite of something myself. What made it worse was the creeping feeling that the hallway had gotten longer, in both directions, since we had left it. It was as if the thing was infinitely long, and it didn't matter where we'd come in because we'd never find the exit, at least not in our lifetimes. To my surprise, Glactyl suggested trying to use the artifact again. I tried pushing buttons, pulling, twisting, and manipulating it, but couldn't manage to make it do anything. All it did was make the edge of the doorways glow. Perhaps it needs to recharge, or perhaps it doesn't work while we're here. Like casting Dimension Door inside a bag of holding? Yes, indeed. Like... Wait, what? Said Glactyl. It's a Dungeons & Dragons reference. It's a role-playing game. Like our enterprises, yes? Sort of, except mostly it involves pretending to seek treasure hoards and killing anyone who gets in the way. So, please explain Dimensions Door and Bag of Holding. They seem relevant. Yeah, but they're fictional. At least to most people they are. Glactyl stared at me blankly. You know what? Forget it, I said. Just trying to lighten the mood. I don't know what I'm talking about. Remember, I'm the stupid one? Glactyl stopped and turned to me. Bob, look at me and listen. You're not stupid. I know you have some college education. You're enterprising, insightful, and resourceful. You're a hell of a businessman. As you pointed out, it's the habit of Earthlings to take risks. A lot of them pay off. Sometimes that gets you into trouble, but a lot of the time it gets us out of it. It's the single thing I admire most about you. Now let's put our heads together, yours and mine, and figure a way out of here. I can't do this without you. This is bigger than either of us, and we can't let it get us down. I have to admit, that was a damn good pep talk. I actually felt a little calmer and more focused on our exit strategy. In fact, I was shocked and pleased. He believed in me after all. I started feeling a little choked up when Glactyl began walking again, and I had to hurry to catch him. The funny thing about Glactyl was that he didn't seem to mind that the hallway was infinite. We had purpose, and he felt confident we'd achieve something. He was right. We were stronger together. In our worst times, we'd saved each other's bacon, or at the very least, convinced each other we'd survive. I stopped him after a few footsteps. Wait, I said. Shh. What's that? Do you hear it? Glactyl admitted he couldn't. It's a high-pitched whining noise, like a microdrone or some distant machine powering up, or the... I slapped my neck instinctively when I felt a little itch. Sorry about that, I said. Fucking mosquitoes. Glactyl rejoiced. Ha ha! Don't you see? You found a mosquito. Yeah, I said. It's from the ship. Our ship. The ship's been full of them ever since we visited the planet where we got the eels. They must have been transported with us when we transported here. Which, said Glactyl, means the ship might not be far away. We both picked up our pace and headed in the direction from which we presumed the mosquito had come. It was a long bet that it was from the same batch of insects that had infested the ship, but then again, how many varieties of interstellar interdimensional mosquitoes can there be that look exactly like the ones from the eel planet? We had to be getting close, because the sound of buzzing insects was growing louder. We stopped at one portal and looked inside, but instead of mosquitoes, we saw a world swarming with clouds of insects, but not just mosquitoes. Inch-long black flies, prehistoric-looking dragonflies with 1-foot wingspans, funny-looking half-insect, half-lizard things I nicknamed coatls, and a whole host of little pests that probably carried some deadly, uncurable distant cousin of malaria or yellow fever. As Glactyl approached the doorway, it glowed, and suddenly the force field collapsed. Immediately, hundreds of insects flew through the open door and out into the hallway. We both backed away, swatting ineffectively at the swarm of flying creatures. "The device opens up doorways," cried Glactyl. "If we can find the right doorway, we can get out of here." Looking both directions down the endless hallway, he said, "I might have been wrong about this being the right direction." "I forgive you," I said. My gaze was slowly drawn toward doorways further down the hallway. "That's very kind," said Glactyl, "but it's important to own up to one's faults. I had simply assumed I was correct and that you should follow me. That was clearly wrong-headed." "I really do forgive you, Glactyl. Besides, there are bigger problems in the world to worry about." "You don't have to be so kind," he replied. "No, really, there are bigger problems to worry about." "Like what?" Glactyl turned and froze as I pointed toward a doorway that had just opened on its own, about a dozen doors away. "Like that thing right there that just stepped out of a portal? The one that looks surprisingly like the animated Cthulhu I produced on Algar?" "Run!" shouted Glactyl. For once, I didn't argue about who was in charge, because it sounded like a good idea no matter whose it was. It appeared that we weren't the only ones who visited or traveled along this strange alien highway. As we had been gawking at the strange surroundings, someone else had arrived. The thing behind us was huge, and while Glactyl and I found the infinitely long hallway rather dimensionless, suffice it to say that whatever it was, it damn sure looked like Cthulhu. It had a giant inhuman head with glassy black eyes, and half its face consisted of a mass of tentacles that writhed like hungry snakes. It also took up most of the space in the hallway. The floors shook with each of its giant footsteps, and in its massive claw, it held a Zil artifact, just like ours, though by comparison to the size of its extremities, it looked tiny. As the monster pounded down the hallway behind us, between gasps, Glactyl finally found the energy to speak. "As I'm sure you've surmised," he said, between breaths, "it, too, is in possession of one of the artifacts. But if I am correct, that is not a Zil." "Could have fooled me," I gasped, as I strove to run faster. "How the hell did it even get in here? None of the places we saw had so much as a bumblebee, except for that world of giant insects," I said, correcting myself. Then, all of a sudden, that thing comes screaming out of its hole like something from the Book of Revelation. I looked back. It was still following us, but its pace had changed from an all-out run to more of a curious saunter. Despite its octopus-like head, it seemed to be sniffing at the wind, as if it had lost our scent. Glactyl tiptoed around the next corner and leaned against the wall to catch his breath. I did the same. As long as we weren't going to be eaten or torn in half in the next 10 seconds, I could use the breather. "That monstrosity must be as blind as a bat," I whispered. Glactyl paused as he mentally accessed his implanted memory modules. "You mean an animal native to Earth that locates its prey using echolocation?" "Right, but it was sniffing the air also, so it must have a good sense of smell too. It knows we're here, but it can't see us. All we really need to do is put some distance between us and throw up some kind of false scent." "How are we going to do that?" asked Glactyl. "We don't have our ship. We don't have the matter replicator or any of my tech. All I have is my unitool, but I'm not sure how that would help us right now." A twinge of pain hit me in the gut. At first, I thought it was from the running. Then I remembered. We still hadn't found a restroom. And oddly, that sparked something in my brain. "I think," I said, "I may have an idea." Glactyl faced away from me as I squatted down in the side hallway, trying to make myself use the floor as a toilet. It was harder than you might think. I had to overcome a number of taboos, instincts, and rather intense fears at the moment to do it, but it was one of the few ways we had to throw the creature off our scent. "Can you hurry it up?" he asked. "We don't have all day." "You try doing this sometime," I complained, as if holding this position weren't enough, and doing it in a semi-transparent room while stars are literally shooting under my ass. Now I have performance anxiety. "Please just get on with things so we can move on to the next part of your plan." "Fine, give me a sec, all right?" I was glad for the first time in memory that I couldn't digest most of the food from the ship's galley. Glactyl said that the matter replicators often gave things a stale taste that was due to a residue of iodizing radiation left over from the assembly of protomatter. That was why, for the most part, I had stuck to a cache of Luna bars I had robbed from one of the vending machines at the slaughterhouse back on Earth. I figured they were good since they already survived the actual apocalypse. I whistled to myself as I let out a little fart to make sure I actually was done. Glactyl paced several steps away, and I managed to conclude my business in a relatively hygienic fashion. "Almost done?" he asked, somewhat annoyed. I finished zipping my pants and wandered over to where Glactyl was. "Parts number 1 and 2 of our plan are complete," I announced. "Now what?" "Now we head back a short distance, hope the stench is overpowering enough to attract his attention, and when he pops down to the side hallway to check it out, we head back in the direction he came from." "That's your plan? To distract the monster with your... "Yeah, that was my plan. You got a problem with it? If so, let's hear your alternative." "No, Bob, it's fine. In truth, I admire your innovation. Your Earth sensibilities may yet save us." We walked a few side halls away toward where we knew the monster would come from and ducked into a branching corridor. About 20 minutes later, I heard our octopus-headed nemesis lumbering down a side corridor leading away from us. Once the stomping faded, Glactyl and I slipped back into the main part of the Hall of 1,000 Doors and ran like hell. An hour afterward, with no sign of Squidface in sight, we gradually slowed our pace to a casual walk. Miracle of miracles, we had survived. But from that point forward, we were a lot more careful about looking through doorways. We never spotted any sign of civilization, though, in any of the doorways that we passed, which led Glactyl to conclude that the sole reason for the Squidface's entry was its use of the Zill artifact. In all likelihood, it too was lost, surprised, befuddled, and hungry. Like us. Which in a way made me sorry for it. When I was a teenager, I used to read a lot of science fiction. In one of those books, Arthur C. Clarke once said something about there being so many stars in the universe that every man, woman, and child could have their own private heaven, or hell. Looking down the seemingly infinite hallway gave me a sense of the yawning chasm between worlds that were right next door to each other. There was such a gap between cultures, languages, and levels of advancement that I paused for a moment to consider how truly lucky Earth had been to have been visited by Glactyl, how lucky I had been to be picked up that night on the road, and how privileged I was at this very moment to just not be alone. We slept on the floor that night. I guess it was a night. And the one after that, alternating sips from a half-full water bulb I had forgotten I still had stowed in my pocket before our sudden departure from the ship. It wasn't much, and we were both extremely thirsty the second day. Glactyl used his unitool to create an alarm of sorts. It would sense motion around us and alert us if anything approached. During the night, I thought about ducking into side worlds to refill the water bulb, but Glactyl reminded me of the long list of toxins, viruses, and archaeobacteria that probably existed on even the most hospitable-looking worlds, and I decided against it after lengthy consideration. Just to be sure I didn't change my mind, though, Glactyl slept with the artifact tucked underneath his tunic. As we awoke after some time, it was impossible to tell whether it was morning or not, and walking down the long hallway, all I could think about was the fact that I was still hungry. Dehydration hadn't quite set in, though I knew from what little environmental science I had been exposed to in college that it would eventually do so, just from breathing. As we started walking once more, I said to no one in particular, "I think I have some Luna bars in my day bag." Glactyl growled. I wasn't sure if it was his stomach making noise or if it were an actual threat. "You left it on the ship," he said, "when you took the artifact out of your pack." Examining the key once more, he added, "By the way, I am relatively certain I have surmised the purpose of the artifact. It is a key." "To what?" "The doors," he said. "Since the Zil artifact seems to open these doors to other worlds, we can undoubtedly leave. But the question is, where should we go? But each one opens to a different place, a different world. It must be the way the dimensional folding functions. The power required to travel distances and time spans is inversely proportional to the input energy required to do so. It is like your proverbial Mobius strip. Two sides of the same piece of paper may seem mere microns apart, but the energy it takes to travel the long, twisted loop around to the other side is far less than that required to puncture the paper. That would require negative energy densities, which do not exist outside of wormholes." I sauntered alongside Glactyl, trying my best not to think of food. "You mean we could have used that artifact at any time to open one of these doors into some distant world?" "Yes, but we've seen few that appear to be hospitable. There might be countless dangers. None of the worlds beyond look civilized, at least anywhere near the portals. Perhaps that's intentional, or perhaps those worlds are truly wild. And we have no idea where or when we'd be going." We walked together in silence for several minutes. Then, this time, it was Glactyl who stopped suddenly. "Smell that?" he asked. "Smell what?" "Is this about the incident in the hallway? I tried to be as clean as possible. I'm sorry, all right? I was improvising." "No," said Glactyl. "That's not it at all." I sniffed the air as well. Something faint right at the edge of sensation, almost non-existent, as if the wind might carry away the last molecule of it at any moment, and it would be gone. I smelled food. Glactyl grabbed me by both shoulders. "You are right. I smell it too. It must be the ship," he exclaimed. "It must have come from one of the doors we passed. The artifact must have briefly opened a door and let the smell of food into the hall." We retraced our steps, opening and examining the nearby doorways. Finally, we found one that rewarded us with the odor of food that made us both drool. Peeking through the door, I recognized the familiar trappings of the cargo bay of our ship. Glactyl looked at the Zil key and saw it glow as he moved it toward the doorway. Then, as he touched the key to the edge of the circular window through which they peeked, the window shimmered and simply allowed us to walk through. When we reached the center of the cargo hold, the doorway closed behind us, and we looked around. We were home, I thought. Or at least, back to the real world. However, as he studied the ship around him, he noticed differences. The bollards nearby were rusted, and the soft rubbery cladding on the pallet mounts was all but gone. The cinch straps that ran the length of the bay had rotted. with only little remnants remaining where the indestructible synthetic fiber had wrapped around the D-rings. The spot where we stood appeared to connect to the ship with a walkway that led out of the cargo bay doors. As I looked back past Glactyl, out a porthole, I viewed one of the ship's exterior fins and noticed that the metal was pockmarked by hundreds of little golf ball-sized craters. They made me think of the hollows that bullets made in the back of pumpkins when my grandfather used to take me out on his farm to learn how to shoot a rifle. "Those are micrometeoroid impact craters," said Glactyl. "The ship must have been drifting in space for a long time, perhaps centuries." The walkway on the other side of the cargo bay opened into another hallway outside, but at least this one seemed normal. Peeking through the cargo bay door, we spied a strangely dressed woman who was closing a hatch as she spoke to a crowd of onlookers, in a language vaguely similar to English. Similar enough, anyway, that if you kind of tilted your head and imagined the speaker to be the orphaned offspring of immigrants, abandoned in the wild and raised by a pack of wolves who spoke using pet language buttons, you could almost understand it. "You, over in the cargo bay, get back with the tour group. These areas are off limits." Glactyl looked at me. I looked back at him, equally baffled. I pointed at us both, then said to the lady, "What, you mean us? This is our ship." "Goddamn foreign cosplayers," she muttered. "You're worse than the Sudan. Get over here right now." Glactyl and I complied since we had intended to enter the ship anyway. The woman motioned at the artifact. "You, whatever your name is, put that toy away or you'll have this place crawling with security. I won't ask you twice." "How long has this ship been here?" I asked, doing my best to sound like an innocent tourist. She pointed to a display panel attached to the wall and said, "You read Spengleitscherin, right? It says right here the remains of the great trader ship ODD-2812, once owned by Bob Clayton and his co-pilot Glactyl, were discovered drifting in the beta quadrant of TOI-700D, approximately 1,071 years ago. Great care has been taken by the Bob and Glactyl Historical Preservation Foundation to preserve the ship in its original form. Do not touch the exhibits." She pointed to Glactyl. "That means you, homeboy. I know your type. Family came to Earth as a visitor 15 centuries ago and thinks they own the place. You and your friends stay right here while I decide what to do with you." Meanwhile, the woman waved at the rest of the tour group, who were slowly moving toward the exit. "That concludes our tour for today," she hollered. "Please come back in the morning if you'd like to see more. The Bob and Glactyl Museum of Interstellar Enterprise opens at 9 a.m. tomorrow." The Traveling Salesman continues in Part 9, where Bob and Glactyl regain their footing in the 33rd century Earth. Thank you for listening. We are always striving to bring you the best stories and storytelling here at the Untold Tales podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends and family and anybody who might be a sci-fi buff. We know they'll love it. And if you'd like to support the show for about 1 cup of coffee a month, you can go to the link on the bottom of the show notes in every episode and find a Support This Podcast link. We value bringing original, high-quality stories to you every month, and we appreciate your support to keep this podcast ad-free. Thank you so much, and have a great day.